Donc c'est un plaisir pour moi d'introduire Spelke, que vous connaissez sans doute déjà, et qui va nous parler de comment est-ce que les enfants apprennent. J'ai le plaisir donc d'accueillir Spelke. Thanks for Liz to join us on stage and to start her presentation. 45 minutes?
45 minutes. To be honest.
Yes. Thanks, Liz.
Okay. Thank you, Adrian, and good morning, everyone. I want to start with just a preface about the meeting that some of us have been at for the last 2 days that we're concluding today, because this was an attempt to bring together people from quite different disciplines, people in economics working to evaluate, figure out what works in the real world for improving education and children's lives more generally, together with psychologists like me who are holed up in our labs trying to answer small questions over long periods of time about how children learn, how their minds work, and how that might help to foster, how that work might be leveraged to foster their learning better. But there are a number of things that I learned over the last few days that I wasn't expecting, and they've changed to some extent the direction of my talk. So for those of you who weren't at this meeting, I wanted to share a couple of them with you. One is that it's not only researchers and policymakers, as Hiro was just telling us about, who need to talk to each other if they're going to grow and learn. It's also children for whom social interactions are incredibly important for learning. For example, over the last couple of days, we learned from a study in Uruguay that if you compare two different ways of bringing digital learning into classrooms, one way is you take groups of kids, 4 of them at a time, and you give each child in the group their own tablet. And now they can interact with the machine, and it will adapt the questions it asks to the abilities of the child, and the children will grow on their own. Or you can do something different. You can take those same 4 children and put them around a single digital device that will allow them to play with each other as a group. So they interact with the device as a group, they decide collectively how they're going to answer questions, and they get feedback not on their individual performance, but on their group performance. And interestingly, that turned out to be more effective in this study than the individual instruction was. I think showing in that one example at least, the benefits of children interacting with each other. But we also have seen benefits of children's interacting with their parents, interacting with teachers. And Hiro's talk today gave an example of that from the study where they were able to remarkably effectively counter the problems caused by the pandemic by having teachers interacting with parents who then interact with children. Another example of that came out of one of the papers that was presented yesterday was a study that compared an intervention during the pandemic that involved simply giving text messages to families with an intervention that involved a phone call to the family. Now, this wasn't over WhatsApp. They didn't get to see the caller. They didn't know the caller in advance. But over time, the same person would call them, present some challenges in mathematics for their children, and the parents and children could work on those challenges together. And that study also showed a big benefit of the calling as opposed to the texting, where all you're getting is an anonymous message from some unknown person without that social contact. So I'm a little bit embarrassed to start my talk with a confession, which is that I've been a researcher for the last 40 years or so. I have felt that whole time that research on children's development and learning and education had important policy implications, but it never occurred to me until Hiro's talk right before mine that maybe what I should have been doing, instead of just sitting in my lab and thinking about this, was actually going out and meeting policy people, interacting with them one-on-one, getting to understand their perspectives and getting to convey mine. In any case, all of this has made me want to reorient my talk on how children learn around one of the features of children's learning that I think is really crucial, both in schools and out, and that is that learning is social, that children don't learn just by sitting back and reflecting on their own. They learn from the people around them, and they especially learn from the people that they care about and that they see as consistent and reliable presences in their lives. So that's going to be my final message for today. But let me start with the phenomenon that has fascinated me ever since I got into this business, and that is how prodigiously good children are at learning. So before they get to school, before anybody sits them down and tries to actually teach them anything, they've already learned much of their native language. They've learned the rough layout of their environment, who lives where, how to get from one place to another. They've developed a whole bunch of concepts of different kinds of objects. They've learned how to recognize them, and they've learned what kinds of things you can do with them. And they've also picked up on a lot of the customs and skills of, that are exhibited by the people around them. And they do all of this without any of those people sitting them down and actually explaining to them, do it this way, do it that way, talk like this, talk like that. They're picking it up on their own. And then something really weird happens. They go to school. School, I think, is weird because a child who, prior to school, has been learning on their own by engaging with people, now finds themselves in a room where everything they're learning about is happening outside that room, and it needs to connect to their daily life outside that room. But it's being conveyed through materials and through people, their language, their text, the exercises that they provide to people at a distance from the phenomena that they're about. And despite this fact, learning in school works for most children. They gain new skills. They master whole new symbol systems. They learn new disciplines and concepts, and they learn how to apply them to the world. I think this is something close to a miracle. It's wonderful, and we should all celebrate the fact that teachers can bring this about and that teachers can do it. But what I want to do is ask what makes children's learning so flexible and effective. Now, this is a question that's debated in my field of cognitive and developmental psychology. Some people think that it's just that children have bigger brains than young animals of other species, that they have a longer period of immaturity. Some people think that there are special species unique talents that we have for communicating, for using symbols, for gaining knowledge from one another. What I'm going to emphasize today are 7 different cognitive systems that I think play an important role in children's learning. 6 of them I call systems of core knowledge. They're not unique to humans. They're shared by other animals, and they guide other animals and human children's learning about the world of objects and places and people in the environment. The 7th system is unique to us. It's a system that guides children's learning of language. There are 1 or more languages that are spoken by the people in their social world. And once they've learned that language, or while they're learning it, they also can learn other symbol systems building on language. So I want to talk today about those 7 systems and also give you 3 examples of learning, 2 of them social. 3-month-old infants learning about other people's actions and goals, and 1-year-old toddlers learning about other people's social relationships before turning to focus on what my primary research has been about for a while, which is children's learning of mathematics in school. So let me start by introducing you to the concept of core knowledge. Research on infants provides evidence that there are at least 6 different cognitive systems that are present and functional at birth, and that serve to bring infants knowledge of the world. Now, each of these systems focuses on a different domain. One focuses on objects, another on places in the environment, others on numerical information, and 2 systems on people. But they have a number of interesting properties in common. One is that they capture the most abstract properties of the entities in their domain. So, for example, the system for representing objects captures the fact that an object continues to exist, whether you're looking at it or not, that if you reach out toward it, your hand will not pass through it, it'll be solid, and you'll come into contact with it. And that as it moves, it will move on a spatiotemporally connected path. It's not going to teleport from one place to another. Now, these are things that are true in all environments, which makes them highly useful for learning. If children start out understanding what the universal properties of objects are, they'll be able to find objects in arrays, they'll be able to track them through time, and they'll be able to learn what the specific objects are that matter in their culture. And the same general principle, I think, applies to all the different systems. Now, the systems don't just differ in the things that they apply to, they also differ in the problems that they solve, and I put a few examples of problems up here. If an object can move around, how do you keep track of it as it's moving and predict where it's going to go next? For places in the environment, how do you learn what paths will get you from one place to another, and so forth? Now, drawing on the abstract properties at the center of each of these systems and the functions that they perform, this gives us a set of indicators that we can use to ask, are these systems only found in infants, or human infants, or do they exist in other animals? And are they only found during the infancy period, or do they continue to exist later in life? And what we find when we ask those questions is, first, they're not unique to humans. That's very useful. It means that we can do experiments on animals to investigate the role of experience in their development that are either impractical or unethical or both to be doing on human infants. And that's how we know that these systems emerge at the very onset of experience, and they're highly resistant to change. But we can also do studies on children and adults, and from studies of adults, we learn that these systems continue to exist and do work for us all our lives, but they're utterly unconscious. If you put an adult in an experiment where you activate, let's say, their core number system by giving them a task, and monitor with some brain measure that indeed the systems studied by Stanislas Dehaene and others that are active when we think about number are active in that person at that time. If you turn around and ask them, what were you thinking about while you were in this study? They will almost never say number. These systems operate below the level of conscious awareness, but they're operating in all of us all of the time. And from studies of children, we learn that these systems indeed do guide children's reasoning and learning. So with that, let me turn to children's learning of mathematics and the core systems that support it. Mathematical learning turns out to depend on all 6 of these core systems. There are 2 systems that give children numerical information about the world. The system for tracking objects represents interactions among objects. And so in order to operate, it has to be able to track at least 3 or 4 objects in parallel. But this system gets leveraged as children learn number words to support learning of exact number concepts of exactly 1, 2, 3, or 4. The other system of number focuses on approximate number concepts. There's also 2 core systems of geometry, one of which focuses on the shapes of small-sized objects for purposes of recognizing the objects and discovering their functional properties. The other function focuses on the shape of the large-scale layout that we navigate through and the distances and directions between different places in that environment. And normally when I give a talk on children's developing learning of mathematics, these are the 4 systems that I focus on. But as I said, I want to focus today, inspired by Hiro's talk and by some of the talks that have occurred over the last 2 days at this meeting, to focus on the social side of learning. So to do that, I want to introduce you to 2 core systems found in human infants that allow them to make sense of the behavior and mental states of the people around them. So one of the 2 systems is engaged when infants view a person acting on 1 or more inanimate objects. For example, reaching over one object to pick up and grasp another object. Okay? Now, studies have presented babies with events in which people act like this, taking an indirect reach for an object, and ask, how are babies understanding that action? Do they see the person just as moving in an arc through space? Or do they see the person's action as goal-directed, and did they see the goal as the thing that's on the far side of that barrier? Well, to see which of those was the case, after presenting babies with that event, they take the barrier away and then contrast 2 events in which the person moves on the same trajectory versus takes a direct path to the object. And infants' patterns of attention suggest that they're surprised when they move on the same trajectory and expect them to take the more efficient direct path to the object, providing evidence that the infants see the person's action as both goal-directed and efficient. They're not going to take a circuitous path if there's a less costly path that could be available. Further studies show that infants can use the actions that they see other people taking to infer the value of the goal objects that the people are, or the goal states that the people are aiming to achieve. So after seeing this little red ball climb a very steep, climb a medium-sized hill, top left, to get to one place, and refuse to climb a medium-sized hill to get to the other place, but climbs a low hill to get to the other place, infers that on a level playing field, that guy is going to want to go toward the object that was at the top of the steeper hill, that was the more valued object for that agent. Now, infants also expect that people's actions will be affected not only by how much they value the goal state that they're aiming to achieve, but also what they're able to perceive in the environment around them. So if a person can see 2 objects, as in the top, is this showing up here? Yes, good, okay. As in the top images here, and reaches for one, infants infer that their goal was to get to that particular object rather than just any object in general. But if one of these 2 objects is hidden from the actor's view, even though both are visible to the infant, they won't make that inference. Similarly, if you manipulate the position of the person, so one is behind their back. And finally, infants understand that people act on in order to cause changes in the world, and that the changes that they cause occur on contact with the things that they're acting on. Now, all of this is very general abstract knowledge. It would apply in any environment. What infants don't seem to have is specific knowledge about the particular kinds of actions that people are likely to perform and the particular goals that those actions are likely to achieve. But this core action system supports their learning as quickly as in a single session about specific actions and their goals. And I'll give you 2 examples on this slide. One is a situation in which a person faced 2 objects and reached for one of them, reaching out to a particular location. And the question to the infant the study that preceded this one was, what was that person's goal? Was it to get to that object, or was it to get to that place? And the answer to that previous study was they were neutral on those two possibilities. It's not clear to them that the reach would be directed to the particular object as opposed to the particular place when they only saw one of these events. But in this study, they were shown two events in which the object that they reached for could appear in either of two different places, and the actor consistently reached for it. And then at test, it appeared in yet a third new place. And now the infants expected them to go for the object that they had consistently reached for. In contrast, when the experiment was set up differently, the infants were equally ready to learn that the person's goal was to get to a particular place. So if the person reached to a single place for two different objects, then when yet a third object appeared at that place, they expected continued reaching to that location. So 3-month-old infants can't yet reach for objects themselves, but they're already able, in a single session, to learn what other people's goals are in particular situations like these. And over time, they'll come to learn that there are classes of actions like object-directed reaching that tend to, in general, be directed to particular kinds of objects. And there are other classes of actions like locomoting through the environment that tend, in general, to be directed to getting toward to particular places. So with that background, let me turn to the second system of core knowledge of people as social beings and start again with a few experimental findings. One that we've known about for many decades now is if you take a newborn infant, very low visual acuity, and present them with a person who's in a face whose eyes are looking directly at them, and compare their attention to that person to one in which the face is exactly the same, except the eyes have been manipulated so they're looking off to the side. That looks like a subtle visual difference to us, but it makes a huge difference to the infant. They will tend to look at the person who appears to be looking at them. They will also, if a person looks at them and then engages in a movement like opening their mouth or sticking out their tongue, the infant will, to the best of their ability, attempt to reproduce that movement, but only if the person was looking at them when they produced it, not if they were looking away or their eyes were closed. Finally, if a person starts out looking at them, but then shifts their attention to the side of a display, the infant will in turn shift their own attention to the same side of the display. And if something appears there, they'll look at it faster than if it appeared on the opposite side. Now, these abilities aren't unique to humans. They've all been demonstrated in non-human primates. And like the abilities to make sense of people's actions, the abilities to understand these more social, communicative behaviors are limited. And one really striking limitation is that the youngest infants show no preference for a face with human features over a face with the features of a monkey or a sheep or even a bird, okay? So no initial predisposition about what the people in their environment are going to look like, but considerable sensitivity to things like how they are going to behave based on subtle cues like the direction in which the gaze is focused. So what could these behaviors mean? Here's my best guess that when an infant sees a face that's looking straight at them, they interpret that person as attending to them and soliciting a state of engagement. When they, in turn, reproduce the facial movement that a person has made, I suggest that they're signaling to that person, I saw you, I'm engaging with you, I copy that, okay? I'm committing to your action and we're doing it together. And what's more, I think when an infant shifts their attention in the direction in which another person who started by looking at them turns, what they're doing is signaling their willingness to share attention to some other thing in the world with this person. Now, Consistent with those suggestions, there's actually evidence now from studies of infants' reactions to social events in which they're just an observer watching other people participating, that, for example, when infants see two social characters imitating each other, they expect them to affiliate with each other. If they see three characters dancing together, they expect them to be more likely to engage in the same imitative actions and so forth. So babies seem to have this system then for making sense of the social behavior of individuals, and the question is, what kind of learning does that support? And I want to talk about just one experiment which provides evidence, I think, that one of the things it supports for infants is learning who is in their own social network and how do those people relate to each other. So this is research by Ashley Thomas, who's now my colleague at Harvard. It was conducted during the pandemic, and it involved very active participation from the parents of the infants in this study. So they all engaged with Ashley over Zoom, and over the course of Zoom, they used the camera on their own, the parents' own video display to create a video of the parent looking at the camera, then looking down to the left and back at the camera, down to the right and back at the camera. And also, while the parent was looking straight ahead, the parent was cued to say different things. So krika, krika at one point, and ee at another point. And then Ashley digitally added two puppets to this display, creating events in which it looks like the infant's parent is hearing one puppet say something, and then turning back and responding by saying something herself, and then hearing the other puppet say something and turning back and responding to the second puppet. And the critical manipulation was to manipulate what the puppet said so that the parent seemed to be imitating one of them and not the other, repeating what was said by one of them but not the other. So after seeing that, the babies then saw videos that only involved the two puppets. The two puppets were facing the camera, and the two puppets moved their mouths while the babies heard a single voice calling to them by name. And the question to the infants, in effect, was, who do they think knows their name? Was it the person that their parent imitated, or was it the other person? So the measure was, which puppet did the baby look to? Now, there was, of course, the worry that maybe they would just look to the puppet that mom had imitated because they found that puppet more interesting. So there was a second test event involving the two puppets, but instead of facing the baby and calling the baby's name, they faced away and they called a different name. Okay? And the findings were, when they faced the baby and called the baby's name, the baby looked at the puppet that the parent had imitated. But they didn't do that in the other condition where the puppets were clearly talking to somebody else. So this suggests that babies are learning about their social network, but it wasn't yet conclusive because maybe they would have responded the same way for any adult who had participated in the events that they saw their parent participate in. So every baby was run in a second condition where they saw, again, videos, but now it was the videos of a parent of another baby, and in that condition there was no effect at all on the name calling. Okay, so the conclusion I draw is that infants represent social characters, in this case, real people, in most cases in the real world, as individuals, and they track their relationships to one another within a social network. We find no evidence that infants are predisposed to categorize people into groups, to distinguish between people based on gender or race or other characteristics that we come to recognize as signaling group distinctions later. They seem predisposed, though, to recognize individual people and in particular to track the behavior and relationships among people who they see as connected to somebody in their own social world, in this case, one of their parents. So in summary, it looks like two distinct systems are applying to people. As agents, people act. As social beings, they engage. And each of them is supporting learning within its domain. Infants, by observing the people around them, can learn about new actions and their goals, and they can learn about new social partners. Each could also support children's language learning, and that's what I want to turn to next, the last building block for this talk today. Now, when I first entered the field, maybe 40 years ago, the standard wisdom was that language learning begins in the second year of life, around 15 months of age. But here in Paris, that view was overturned by a wonderful psychologist, Jacques Meller, who began to study language learning in infancy, asking the question, what do babies come to know about the language being spoken by the people around them before they're able to say anything themselves, and for that matter, before any of the people around them have the faintest clue that they've learned anything about the language that they're hearing? Now, Jacques has had a wonderful group of students. You wouldn't be able to see them if I had put everybody's picture on this slide, but here are some of the people who've worked actively in Paris with Jacques on language learning. I'm not one of them, by the way. I'm an admirer of this field, but not a contributor to it. The methods that they use, though, are very similar to the methods that are used to study core knowledge in other domains. Spontaneous attention to expected or unexpected events, patterns of brain activity engendered by viewing events of different kinds, and so forth. So let me give you some of the highlights from this research. The first thing that Jacques and his students discovered was that language learning begins in the womb. As soon as a baby is born, tested in the maternity ward at Maternité Colloque, I think it was, here in Paris. As soon as they're born, if you play them speech that has the prosodic structure of their native language and compare their attention to it to speech with the prosodic structure of a non-native language, they show a preference for the first. Also, at birth, some of Jacques' students found that children make a fundamental abstract grammatical distinction between different kinds of words. The content words that refer to things in the world and the function words that play grammatical roles in the phrase that somebody is uttering. Now, these babies are able to distinguish them because content words are more numerous and in the lexicon and less frequently heard than the function words, and content words are stressed and function words are not. But they're learning both, and they're learning the fundamental distinction between them very, very early. By 4 months of age, they're sensitive to the dependency relations among function words. By 6 months, they're starting to learn the specific meanings of content words. And by 7 months or so, they're starting to, they've come to know what the basic grammatical structure of their language is. Is it a language in which subjects come before predicates, so you have the subject and then the verb, or is it the reverse? Both kinds of languages exist. By 6 or 7 months, children know which kind of language the people in their world are speaking. But to just give you a concrete feel, I just want to tell you about one experiment that was conducted on 4-month-old infants, looking at the beginnings of this syntactic knowledge. Now, for this study, 3 different populations of people, Italian-speaking adults, German-speaking adults who knew no Italian, and German-hearing infants who were exposed to no Italian, heard the same sentences. And the sentences basically had the structure of a subject, then an auxiliary verb, then a content verb, and then a functional morpheme at the end of the content verb. So and I've put the function words in italics here. So the brother is singing, the sister can talk, and sorry, English is a bad example because we don't hear the function word at the end of talk, but there's one there in French, signaling the infinitive form, and in Italian as well. And they hear for 20 minutes different sentences that have these dependency relations. And then after the 20 minutes, they hear ungrammatical mismatches of the auxiliary verb and the functional affix at the end of the main verb. okay? Like the brother can eating, ungrammatical in English or French or Italian, okay? And while they're listening to all of this, their brain activity at the scalp, the electrical activity at the scalp, which is generated in the brain, is being measured. And in particular, people drew on a well-known finding in this literature, which is that there's a characteristic brain response to a syntactic violation. Okay? And they're looking for that response to see, do you get that response when you hear the brother can eating? Okay? So they're looking for that signature, and what they find is the Italian adults show it. The German adults do not show it after 20 minutes, and the German hearing infants show it after 20 minutes. So these kinds of function words and relationships are some of the hardest things for us to learn as adults if we try to master a new language, but babies seem to be all set up for learning them from the beginning. So in summary, before they start speaking, babies have deciphered all of the most fundamental abstract aspects of their native language. They're working on all of these aspects in parallel. They're mastering the things that are the hardest things for us to learn as adult second language learners. And they're doing all of that before anyone in their environment has the faintest clue that they're understanding anything about the speech that's being spoken to them. Now, an important point is that if you ask what are the sources that infants are learning from, they don't learn from the radio or the television. They don't learn from overheard speech by the neighbors if they're talking in a different language from the people in their world. They learn from the people in their own social world. And from about 3 months of age, they're not only learning language from the people in their own social world, they're learning to use the language that people in their social world are using to learn about the world. And I want to give you 2 examples of that. Do I have time to do this, Adrienne? Okay. First of all, they're learning something. Infants have expectations about the intentions of the people who are speaking to them that come from the 2 systems of core knowledge. So, as I said, infants expect people to act efficiently, and this expectation carries with it the expectation that if the action someone is performing is talking to you, they're going to talk efficiently. They also expect them to act relevantly to the current situation. So if you want to get to an object and there's something in the way, you've got to either move that thing out of the way or you've got to move around it. They expect actions to be relevant, and they also expect speech to be relevant to the particular situation that the person is in. But as social beings, infants expect other people to share their experiences with them. And this, I think, naturally leads to the expectation that they're going to expect other people's speech to be informative, that other people will speak so as to convey their experience of the current situation to the infant. So if that's right, then from infancy, children should expect that other people's speech is going to be efficient and relevant to the situation and informative, the Gracian maxims of good communication. And they should be able to use speech to learn about the things people talk about. And I've got 2 examples of this. One, infants as young as 4 months of age will use what somebody says to figure out that different perceptually diverse objects belong in the same category. So they see one at a time each of these different pictures of dinosaurs, but they hear the same word, a made-up word in this case. Look at the toma applied to each of those pictures. And then after seeing that, the babies have show that they formed the category dinosaur by generalizing. Over time, they become used to the fact that they're seeing dinosaurs, and when they see a new dinosaur at test, that's no big deal. They've been seeing different ones all along, so they look longer when they see an object that's not in that category. But this isn't simply an attention effect, because in a parallel condition, instead of talking, they play music to the child, and that also raises the child's attention to the dinosaurs, but doesn't lead them to categorize them. But my second example is that language represents the world more finely than perception and action do. Because the very same perceptual perceived entity can be construed in different ways. And we use language to distinguish those construals and to share with other people the construals that we think are most relevant to a particular situation. Now, children are learning language as it's used in conversation, and conversation is, above all, a matter of sharing one's perspective with other people. Now, that raises the possibility that one of the things that's happening when children go to school and they start learning mathematics is that the same process is taking place that has been taking place at home when they look at a dog and someone says, "That's a Dalmatian. It's a special kind of dog. It comes from this place or that place," and so forth, okay? This is a potential bridge in the processes underlying informal learning prior to school or outside of school and formal learning in school. I think education is, above all, a means for conveying to children new perspectives on their common, shared, known, everyday experience, that the earth that looks flat is actually round, that the everyday number words you're using at home can be combined in different ways to form other numbers and expressed in different ways through different expressions, and so forth. Now, these new interests and perspectives are conveyed by teachers and by texts using language, raising the question, how do children learn them? And here I want to shift fairly radically and spend my last 10 minutes telling you about an enterprise that has excited me enormously over the last 14 years now, I guess 12 years now, that I've been engaged in with Esther Duflo, that's bridging across economics and education and my field of developmental cognitive science. And I want to take one of my 5 minutes to just say something about how this all began. Back in May of 2012, Esther gave the highly prestigious, highly attended Tanner Lectures on Human Values at Harvard. And I was eager to hear her speak, but I had never read anything that she'd written, so I really had no idea what she was going to say. I had been arguing for years, based on studies of infants, that all over the world, however different we look on the surface, we're all underlyingly alike. We all share the same core knowledge, the same abstract and most important, deepest conceptions of the world. But I was surprised by Esther's talk, because she started out by telling us about all kinds of ways in which poor people in developing countries all over the world will act in ways that look crazy to us. But in each of those cases, she argued that they are acting in just the way that we would act if we were in their situation. Their actions are rational and interpretable with respect to the situation that they are in. What I took from this is there's a universal psychology that can apply across people in the most diverse places, living in utterly different ways. So I was wildly excited to go up and meet her and explore this view further. But she actually reached out to me before I had a chance to reach out to her. And she presented me with a huge challenge to a picture that I had been painting about how children learn mathematics. The picture, roughly, that there are these core systems of number and geometry, so kids are all set to learn math, and then they hear language and they learn symbols, so they're all set to map those on to math. The challenge that she presented came from research that had been conducted in India, showing that something like 3 out of every 4 children in India, I'm going to have to go faster here, so take my word for this, fail to learn the basic math curriculum in school. And the question is, why would that be? Why aren't they all learning math, and what can we do about this? So we set about to try to do something about this by creating games for children to play that built on materials that elicit core knowledge in infants. The idea being that if infants have them and they never go away, they're going to continue to be effective in children and meaningful to children in different environments. Then the games were introduced into preschools in poor districts of Delhi, these children played these purely intuitive games, and both before and at 3 time points after, the farthest time point being at the end of first grade, their mathematical skills were assessed. Now, from the beginning, the kids in Delhi played the games as readily and as effectively as children in Boston had done so. But to evaluate them, kids were randomized to either get the math games or to get a set of games that trained different aspects of social cognition that had nothing to do with mathematics, perception, and other aspects of mental state reasoning, or to get a no treatment control. And we found that the intuitive social play had enduring effects on children's mathematical intuitions, but it did not boost their learning of math in first grade. So we went back and thought more seriously about language and symbols and the roles that they play in children's learning, including learning of mathematics, and designed a new intervention that had 4 conditions to it. 1, again, intuitive materials only. 2, symbols only, playing the same games, but instead of seeing images of 2 objects, you see the numeral 2, for example. Or alternating play of half of the intuitive games and half of the symbolic games. And now, these are a lot of bars, but I just want you to look at the green ones. This is the alternating or mixed condition. And you see that although they only got half of the intuitive materials that the intuitive group got, they developed the intuitions just as well. They also only got half of the symbolic materials that the symbolic group did, but they learned the symbols both just as well, showing that intuitive and symbolic math can synergize and lead to benefits not only immediately, but a year later at the end of the first year of formal schooling. So that's one synergy, but I just probably don't have time to talk about the Ghana study, do I? Okay, that's the only synergy I'm going to be reporting on. There is another study that we've been involved in that asks whether parent education has a causal impact on children. The answer is it matters which parent, but if it's the mother who's getting more education, the answer is yes, it does have a causal impact. And the impact, interestingly, is not primarily on the youngest children, it's primarily on children when they start to go to school, and it's on topics like abilities like reading and math. We think the reason for this is that a child whose primary caregiver, which in Ghana is almost always the mother, a woman, and most often the mother, if the primary caregiver has gotten more education herself, the child, on going to school, meeting the new teacher with a comparable education level, is going to feel more ready to learn from that person, to trust them, to adopt their perspectives. For social reasons, they'll be more likely to learn, to make the considerable investment that it takes to become a skilled reader or mathematician. Let me skip through these studies and get just to my last slide. Why are... I think I said that already. I was going to tell you about another math game. Sorry, I timed this so badly. This is my last slide with 5 suggestions. First of all, how do children learn? Well, part of the answer is they don't need to learn everything. We're all born with universal systems for capturing highly useful abstract properties of the world, and we exercise those systems all our lives. I think these systems provide a potential, though not always actualized, common ground across all people. I'm going to need to follow Hiro's advice and talk to policymakers that we should all be talking to people from other groups more than we do. So that's the first suggestion. The second is that they have a prodigious talent for learning the languages of the people in their social world, and for using those languages to learn what other people know from the things that other people say. The third is that they learn better when they're given a chance to build on their universal intuitions, when formal instruction takes account of the capacities that children are already bringing to the table from the cognitive abilities that preceded their entry into school. The fourth suggestion is that children learn better when their individual performance is complemented by group activities. I think that's because the group activities elicit language and social interaction and collaboration, all of which we know are good for children's learning. And finally, I think they learn better when the social world at home coheres with the social world in school, eliciting trust in the learning, the formal educational process and the people who are presenting it. Thank you.